Oh, I'm going to talk about a few things in this week's vlog. In particular, the Anthropocene era that we're in, and the coming carbon crash, and why I think Trump is wrong to take America out of the Paris Climate Change Accord for economic reasons. I think it will hurt the US economy. So, I'll talk about that later, so keep listening. I want to start off with a few little odds and ends, because sometimes I do a single subject vlog and sometimes I ramble a bit, and I'm going to ramble a bit today, okay? But there are a few little bits and pieces that have come up over the last few days that I thought probably worth a mention. One is just a little rant on student loans. I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that it's a big scam. I mean, when I went to university, I got a grant, okay, and everything was paid for, and as long as I lived carefully, I could afford the rent, and my fees were paid, and that was that, right? I had enough to live on. That was the idea of the grant. And also, of course, I've supposedly benefited society by using my training in various careers as well. And it's kind of true, although I did a physics degree, I haven't actually worked in physics, but it's provided a useful background for most of what I've done anyway. And also the actual experience of university has been kind of useful too, just for I don't know, keeping me up to date, or helping me to learn how to learn, really, without it being so closely directed as at school. So that's probably benefited society too. I haven't made any great achievements, but maybe little things like making vlogs and so on, which I could do without a degree, but still, do have the science background for some of the things I talk about. Maybe that helps with the butterfly effect or something, I don't know. But back in the day, we got a grant. And now, students have to take out a loan for their fees. And of course the universities have thought, oh right, we'll better put the prices up then, hadn't we? So the prices have tripled over the last few years. Obviously a scam, right? And the students are saddled with huge debts. And there are a couple of things to point out. That students not only need their student loan to pay their fees, but actually, for many of the students, I mean a large number, the rents for student accommodation have expanded too, so that they are now something like, in some places, up to 95% of the value of their student loan. So the students have to get another loan to pay for their accommodation. And this is commonplace now. On top of that, 56% of graduates in the UK end up working in jobs which don't need their degree in the first place. And many of those are not very well paid. Obviously, I think we're building up a generation of resentful people who will resent the current system. And that's good, because we need some sort of a revolution to turf it out. But we still want to keep the best bits, like freedom and stuff, right? Actually, the government in Britain estimates that more than 40% of student loans will never be repaid. And I have to say, if I were a student, I would not really be looking to repay it, because it's immoral, frankly, to have to take these loans on in the first place. I might, pay lip service to it, but without actually trying too hard. I mean, one issue is that it causes a poverty trap for the students, because they don't pay back the loan until their income reaches a certain level. And then what happens is their marginal tax rate suddenly increases by like 6% or something. So suddenly they're paying a higher rate of tax on their income than they were before. So there's an incentive for them not to get a higher paid job, at least for if they can't skip across that to somewhere where it really benefits them with really much higher paid, then there's an incentive for them really to stick at something more mundane. And this cannot be good for society, really, I think. And it's unsustainable in other ways. I mean, how is someone with like a 50 to £100,000 loan going to save up for a deposit on a house or pay off their mortgage when they're already paying an extra 6% tax on their income anyway, or whatever it is? I guess it'll vary from time to time. How are they going to afford to raise a family? Because these days, normally, just to be able to afford it for a normal couple, both parties have to go to work. Since women entered the workforce in big numbers in the 70s, the cost of labour has gone down. Because you double the number of workers, the cost of labour goes down. So wages have stagnated and corporate profits have gone up, but you now need two people to support a household if it's got two people in it, whereas in the old days one person's wage could support an entire family. So people are putting off having children. In Western countries, the birth rate is below the replacement rate for natives, and so the government, brings in people from elsewhere, and that'll bring in extra people for a generation or so. But then they'll be caught in the same trap. And anyway, we're all going to be replaced by robots, we're told. Anyway, there's a chance. As far as paid labour is concerned, that's possibly right. But there's a lot of unpaid work that's done, after all, and that could be done. Carers, charity work, political involvement in the community and stuff like this could be done. But at the moment it's not paid for. So it's not on most people's radar. And so I think we're ending up with a generation of semi-bankrupt, financially paralysed, underpaid graduates in the workforce in quite large numbers who are seriously going to be resenting the system at the moment. They know they've been ripped off, or if they haven't figured it out, they will, because being graduates, they're going to be smart enough to know, after a while. And I think the system is storing up trouble for itself, and good thing too, because it's corrupt, and this is an obvious sign of it. Everything is a commodity, and we have to pay for it all. And yet the whole system relies on everything that we've input in the first place. And Mother Nature, the commons, right, which are co-opted big time by corporations, and we're taxed to pay for it all. Anyway, I think we're going to see trouble if an entire generation of people, and students these days are not the entire generation, but they're a big chunk of it, because far more students go to college now than used to. It used to be like a few percent of the population, but now it's like half or something. So it's a lot of people in a lot of debt, and that's going to have a huge depressing effect on the economy. And the powers that be have no answer to it, except more of the same. But if more of the same is implemented, it'll produce more of the same. More debt, a permanent economic depression, crashes, etc., etc. And Well, there you go. That's my first little rant, student loans. Okay. A bit of science now. It's been discovered that bees appear to have a concept, or at least understand the concept of zero. Now, you might think, what's the big deal? It has been shown that various higher animals understand the concept of zero, such as humans, although humans only apparently got it in our civilization, right back in ancient India. Before then, there was no zero. The Romans didn't have zero, for example, in their maths. But it's been discovered that even creatures as, if you like, primitive as bees, as simple, if you like, as bees, do. What the experimenters did was train some bees to detect lower numbers of items. So they'd show them two screens, and one would have, say, 3 blobs on it, and the other one would have 2 or 1 blob on it. And they rewarded the bees for going to the one with fewer blobs. And once the bees were trained, they tried them with a screen that had blobs on it and a screen that had nothing on it, just a blank screen. And the bees went to the one with no blobs on it. So they understood that nothing is less than something, which is quite something, actually, quite a concept, really. So bees are pretty clever. I mean, as I say, humans only really got it a couple of thousand years ago. Another one, myopia, short-sightedness. That's me. I've got short-sighted eyes. It's been discovered that the chances of being short-sighted correlates directly with the number of years you spend in education. So if you spend more years in education, you're more likely to become short-sighted. Now, I became short-sighted while I was still at school. In fact, the early years of secondary school. I was about, or just before, I was about 10 or 11. Something like that, maybe 10. Maybe even earlier than that, I don't know, 9. But this is a big problem, potentially. I mean, like in Japan, something like 90% of students end up short-sighted. And they have a huge lot of pressure on them to perform, which I think is a really bad way to do it. You can get some good results, but you get a lot of people burning out. And they're not following their star, as it were. They're just following what's prescribed for them. So it's uncreative in its outcome. People's creativity is lost and destroyed, and just for the sake of good results for a career which is backward-looking. If you want creative people, you have to do it another way. The scientists who've studied this theorise that maybe what's causing it is a lack of time out of doors, a lack of sunshine, and a lack of exercise. I suppose it might also be poring over books, like that too much as well, I would have thought. Although the eyes are made for looking, if you're doing the same thing for years at a time too much more than you would have done in the Stone Age, which our eyes are kind of designed for, then maybe there are consequences to that, and this is measurable. So, that's that. Next. And it kind of links on with the student loan thing, because here we are in the Anthropocene era, where humans are screwing up the environment measurably. Okay. And I was reading a book by Guy Standing about the corruption of capitalism. Good book. And he pointed out that if we're going to change things, we really need to break the link between consumption of goods and work. He didn't go into it much, but it seems to me that a lot of people kind of think, I've worked so hard, I deserve to buy this 46-inch TV or whatever, more gadgets and goods and stuff, right? You spend the money, you get home, you're exhausted, you want some reward other than abstract money, right? So you buy stuff. And in addition, I don't know, when I'm walking out and about, I see people chucking litter on the streets. We're all chucking plastic. A lot of people don't bother to recycle stuff properly. And from what I've heard, their excuse is, I've paid my taxes, I'm being taxed at a flipping fortune. It's not my problem, right? I can trust the entire environment because I've paid stupendous taxes, and they should sort it out. That's what they're being paid for, right? They being the government or somebody. It's kind of understandable, and it's a form of rebellion, but it's harmful. And Guy Standing's suggestion for that is that a universal basic income might break those links, because instead of having to work hard for your security, when at the moment what we get is meal tickets, you don't work, you don't eat, or at best in the West you get a very basic standard of living plus the state hounding you to perform, which actually prevents you maybe finding something that suits you right. You have to just get anything and work, even though it's unsuitable and even though somebody else could do it better. You just have to get those idiots off your back, right, to get your income. But with a universal basic income, your security would be covered, so you would not feel that stress. And evidence is that most people would still go to work. There are clear benefits to it for them, but it's not such a big crisis, and there'd be more room for creativity and so on. And it might just break the link between consumption and work and taxes, paying taxes and stuff, because you're clearly getting something back for all the input you're putting out, right? So whereas at the moment it's like one rip-off after another for people. We are wage slaves. Better than serfs, better than outright slaves, but it's still a kind of a slavery, and it would still be even with the universal basic income in a sense, but it's more closely tied to the natural state of things. We will be supported by the world, as it were, through the government, rather than entirely through our own efforts, which is too much, really. And it blocks a lot of creativity and productivity, I think. It would also leave more capacity available for protecting the environment, because many more people will be able to do socially beneficial things, which we do actually need, especially if we're going to save the environment from ourselves. So there would be more engagement in politics, which is probably scary for the elite. There would be more engagement with charity work and environmental work and stuff like that, because enough people would not need to have a job, and there is going to be a shortage of jobs probably in the future, jobs in terms of paid labour, because automation is going to take some of it. It would also free people up from 0-hour contracts and rubbish like that, because they could just say no to it because they're already getting enough. So companies would have to actually treat people decently if they wanted some workers. So it would redress the balance between working people and corporations. That could be scary for the elite too, but they're looking at their bottom line ultimately, and they'll put up with it because the evidence is it will be more profitable in the long run. So we'll see. Another thing we need to do to protect the Earth in the Anthropocene, the idea is half Earth, it's called. So what the idea is, half of the Earth will be dedicated to other species. and we humans keep the other half. Um, there's a lot of talk of rewilding and stuff, and it's happening in places. Um, and it's feasible because most humans live in cities now, so with our populations are fairly concentrated. Um, so it's feasible for there to be lots of national parks and nature reserves and so on. It's gradually becoming more and more feasible as humans become more and more urban. So we might be able to do it. And this is what the United Nations much maligned Agenda 21 is all about, is assisting with the concentration of humans in cities. I don't like everything they think about, like putting us in micro accommodation and very small flats, and adjusting the rules for farmers in the outback, so that it favours corporates rather than small producers, and things like that. I think are underhand and not good at all. I don't really like the way it's being implemented, but something like that is probably what's needed. I think there's no problem with people living out of cities. Actually, it could be done, but the economy is pressing people into cities, so it's probably best to go with the flow, at least for now. And those that really want to not live in a city can do so. Although the economic pressures will be much against them, and so will the rules and regulations, as I say, like rules for small farmers and small holdings are toughened to the extent that in some cases only a corporation can afford to obey the rules properly. It's just not economic to be a small producer these days in many fields. It's kind of a form of corruption, really. Everything is biased because the politicians are bought by the corporates these days. This has to change. It will after some suitable crisis, but for now that's the way things are going. The other thing we can do, of course, is reduce our population. Now, we're the only species in the history of this planet anyway that is actually making some effort to reduce its population. It's happening by accident in the Western countries because they're overtaxing us and people can't afford families and stuff, and corporatism is like with the student loans that I mentioned, putting people into debt so that they can't afford houses and families and so on. And so they're having children later and later, and it's becoming infeasible in many cases. And we're below the replacement rate, as I mentioned. Either in this video or another, I've mentioned it anyway. Also, we're doing it deliberately through the education of girls, making sure in as many third world places as possible that girls are educated, because it's been shown that they then take control over their bodies, as it were, and tend to have fewer children. And also through vaccination, in order to reduce the population, because what vaccination does is not, as the conspiracy theorists would say, secretly kill people or affect their fertility, but through simply saving the lives of more children, so that the parents don't have to have 8 children to guarantee that some of them will outlive themselves. They can get by with 2, 3, 4, and the next generation, once that's in place, will hopefully go down to replacement level. It's been shown to work in some places where it's been done, so it's a good idea, potentially. And as I've mentioned, I think in previous videos, the world population is projected to peak out at about maybe 12 billion, and then hopefully decline to a sustainable level. We're probably overshooting, and I'm going to talk about that a bit in my next video, which is about the energy feedback crisis of civilizations. So I'll stop here on that, but the next thing is the carbon crash that I mentioned at the beginning. Trump, okay, is taking America, or says he is anyway, he might change his mind, you know what he's like, taking America out of the Paris Climate Change Accord of 2015. That was the one where 178 countries got together and decided we want to stop the climate or the temperature of the Earth increasing by more than 2 degrees centigrade over the next century or so, and preferably by 1.5. And I think that Trump is making an economic mistake by taking America out. He says that, you know, it's anti-competitive, it's bad for American industry. He's wrong. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I thought about it. I think he's wrong. I'll explain why. A lot of other people, I think a lot of investors seem to agree with Trump, because investment in fossil fuel and fossil fuel industry is still high. People are still investing in oil companies and exploration and so on. So the wisdom of the crowds, as it were, is saying this Paris climate change rubbish is not going to achieve anything. That's what investors seem to think, right? But I think they're not looking ahead far enough. I mean, if they're investing for short-term profit, maybe they're going to do all right. But the medium term and long term is very much against the oil industry. First of all, because of the Paris Climate Change Accord in part, but also because of just changes in technology, demand for fossil fuels is going to reduce. It's already, the rate of growth of demand is already reducing. So we're approaching some sort of a peak. People have been talking about peak oil for many years. These things always carry on for longer than anybody expects. But we're getting there. But we are going to reach peak carbon soonish. But the thing is, old fossil fuel using technologies are gradually being phased out. And not just because of the Paris Climate Accord, it's happening through competition as well, and people's concern for the environment as well. So we're having cars which are hybrid or electric now. It's kind of feasible. I think the French have said they're going to phase out petrol cars or diesel cars, fossil fuel based cars, by 2040 something, and Britain has suggested the same. It may happen sooner than that. I heard something like 2025 petrol cars might be banned in London or something. That's very early. There's not that many electric cars around at the moment, and not many charging points either. But a concerted effort could do it. We have energy-saving light bulbs everywhere. The old incandescent bulbs are actually banned in Britain now, and we have energy-saving bulbs everywhere, and they use a lot less electricity. There is the hope still of fusion power. Scientists do think it is going to be commercial within a decade or two. A prototype scaled up working fusion reactor is being planned at the moment. I think it's in France again, or Switzerland, or both, knowing Europe. I think, is it the Japanese or the Chinese are also working on one? And of course we're slowly switching over to wind power, wave power, solar power. There is dirty nuclear power too. It may be necessary, but the trouble with the waste products is they last hundreds of thousands of years. That's a big problem. But nevertheless, all of that is gradually a ticking time bomb for the fossil fuel industry. We need oils for medicines and fertilizers, not for cosmetics and burning in cars and engines and power stations, really. Also, of course, as demand declines, that's going to increase competition between the oil-producing countries, and that's going to drive prices down, of course. And it's also going to make some fossil fuel-based industries non-viable if they don't change. Like, imagine if the car industry didn't start investing in electric cars, and if Trump is taking America out of the climate change accord and not going to be implementing rules to try and encourage companies to produce electric cars, then the Americans are probably going to be left behind. And they'll have electric cars, but they'll all be foreign. And the same for other products too. Is that what he wants? I don't think so. So it looks like there could even be a crash in oil prices ultimately because of falling demand combined with competition between the producers. Yeah, it would crash in order to supposedly renew demand, but actually the demand will be permanently gone. It won't be encouraged by lower prices. At best, it'll zigzag its way down from the producer's point of view. So, really, countries should be investing in post-fossil fuel industries if they're going to get anywhere. Well, that's my thinking. Any comments on that? Otherwise, I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.